Signs above the saloon, general store, and blacksmith's forge. A guy in a worn brown suit adjusted his hat and unfurled a document on the cracked courthouse steps, clearing his throat with ceremony. Grafton was dusty and resentful under a bleached sky. The scorching sun warped the Charles Whitlock estate, ordered the auctioneer to announce a ragged tan voice. His properties, interests, and dependents are available to Grafton and nearby counties starting today. In the crowd, men shifted their weight, ladies fanned their faces, and boys and old men spit tobacco onto the dirt. Eleanor stood like a lost horse tied to the steps post. She was hardly visible against the courthouse, covered in a ragged black shawl and a worn gray dress. Her finely bound hands in front of her, with frayed rope, trembled in the heat. Her temple bruises were fading but evident. Damp, knotted dark hair hung about her face, a halo of humiliation and defiance. She raised her chin, auctioneer continued, pretending not to notice her. First item. Bids for the Whitlock ranch house and its acres were fast. Land was worth battling for, but the auctioneer, sweating, went to the post and said, "Next, Eleanor Whitlock, the orphan dependent." Men stared down at their boots. Women tightened their fingers on their fans in a thunderclap-like quiet. No one moved. Everybody knew her story. Illegitimate daughter of Charles Whitlock, born from an unnamed, undesirable, unclean woman. Eleanor was hidden from polite society like livestock until the law designated her a dependent asset due to rumors that her mother was a nomad. Auctioneer cleared throat again. Her cooking skills can aid homesteading. Strong constitution, he said faintly. Nobody raised their hands. A fly buzzed Eleanor's ear. She didn't wince. Voice breaking, the auctioneer said, "Come now. Someone must need her." Mean, harsh laughter crept across the throng. Someone mumbled, "Not for a cursed thing." Her mother allegedly whispered to spirits. She closed her eyes against the sun. She wasn't delusional. She understood what would happen if no one claimed her. Life below servitude. Boarding places would expel her. The brothels would break her. She refused to beg. Auctioneer turned helplessly in slow circles. Last call, croak, before her remand. Then a chair hit the dirt. Small but gunshot-like, the sound ripped through the air. A figure emerged from the saloon porch shadows, tall and broad-shouldered. His coat was dusty and old. He covered his face with a worn hat, but his jagged neck scar was hidden under his collar. He had a pistol belt around his hips and moved lethally despite not carrying a rifle. Slow, methodical, like a predator deciding to strike. Cassian Holt. Terrified whispers spread through the throng. Without having to, he didn't speak. He raised a hand, curling at once, claiming. The auctioneer grew pale. "Sir, you bid." Cassian remained silent. Auctioneer swallowed. $1. Nobody countered. A hollow fracture emerged from the gavel. Sold. Cassian walked forward, and the crowd parted like water. He stopped in front of Eleanor, boots heavy in dirt. Nobody moved for a second. She gazed at him. His pale, indifferent gray eyes were storm clouds about to break. He took a knife from his belt silently. Eleanor held firm despite her heartache. He quickly cut her rope from her wrists. The coarse fibers dropped. The man didn't touch or drag her. He turned and went to his horse at the hitching post. Eleanor paused. Everyone in town watched her, waiting for her to collapse, scream, or run to affirm that she was undeserving of even a criminal's pity. She did none of those. She followed him, cloaking her shredded pride. Cassian mounted effortlessly and reached down to offer her his hand, her first choice in months. Eleanor got it. His arms were loose but steady as he pulled her onto the saddle in front of him. Under their weight, the horse shuffled, but Cassian spoke quietly into its ear in a low voice no one could hear. It stopped. They rode without looking back at the place that sold her. Behind them, dust rose, engulfing the courthouse, auctioneer, and hateful faces. Wild and open land extended ahead. Promises, safety, and chains are absent. Eleanor breathed as the town vanished behind the hills. It was unclear where Cassian Holt was taking her, but it couldn't be worse than where she left. Eleanor felt dangerously close to hope for the first time in her brief, scarred life. Eleanor was driven further from the town that had sold her like cattle, as the horse's hooves hit the brittle soil. Cassie and Holt remained silent. The huge, indifferent land stretched before them. The sun melted into a scarlet wounded sky as dry grass whispered against their boots. Eleanor held the saddle horn, muscles straining and clothing adhering to her flesh. He guided them down deer and desperate-only trails off the main trail. He slowed at a hole with boulders as the world lost its light. Cassian dismounted and lifted her without ceremony. Like a man who handles broken objects, his hands were harsh but cautious. After landing, Eleanor staggered, legs shaking. Before falling, she caught herself. Cassian silently walked the horse to graze and returned with a blanket and a tiny tin of beans. A little fire started when he struck a match against his boot heel, just enough light to keep the gloom away. He threw the blanket at her, offering, not ordering. Eleanor wrapped it across her shoulders, felt its gritty warmth penetrate her bones. She watched him eat minimally from the tin and offer her the rest without looking up. She took it. Hunger trumped pride. They heard the desert's low, melancholy melody, the wind through stones, and an owl's call. Cassian rested against a rock, arms crossed, face shadowed. His eyes were unreadable in the firelight. Eleanor wanted to ask why he claimed her, what he wanted, and whether he expected payment she couldn't offer, but terror kept her from speaking. Instead, she laid on the ground, tightening the blanket, gazed at the starry sky. The soil was hard. No one guarded her for the first time in months as the night air bit her naked skin. No barred doors, no unsaid deals, just silence, and a man who treated her like a person, not something. Sleep was interrupted by the dwindling fire and the horse's snorts. Cassian was awake, sitting against the rock, watching the darkness like it would come alive, in the deepest part of the night. He either didn't notice or didn't mind her gazing. Eleanor closed her eyes again, sinking in tiredness. Tomorrow would bring inquiries, but tonight was about breathing and surviving. The frail start of something she hesitated to believe in. Eleanor stirred under the thick quilt as the morning sun removed the cold from her skin. Her body hurt from the hard ground, but silence woke her. An unnatural quiet. Cassian was already feeding little sticks into the fire pit. His hat obscured his face while his coat hung from his shoulders. He threw her a dried beef strip and a battered canteen without saying anything. Eleanor slowly sat up, tightening the blanket and nodding stiffly. She stood despite her ribs hurting from the harsh handling days earlier. Cassian steadily saddled the horse. He waited silently and unreadable afterward. Her choice. Eleanor approached him with her remaining power. She was put into the saddle like she weighed nothing, mounted behind her, and they rode into the light. The land was vast and raw. A single hawk circled overhead as dry weeds smacked their legs. Time blurred into wind and hoofbeats. Cassian led them on untraveled tight pathways. At midday, they entered a tiny valley with a dilapidated cabin against the hills. The porch sagged dangerously. Broken stones were surrounded by wild vegetation. Though ruined, it provided shelter. Cassian dismounted first, loosely harnessing the horse. He booted the door open. He turned and waited after seeing inside. Eleanor paused. Her chest tightened at the thought of crossing another threshold after so many that it only hurt, yet standing outside brought no relief. She intervened. Dust obstructed air. A shattered bed frame, 2 chairs, a frigid fireplace, and a cracked table were near the wall. Cassian surveyed the place leisurely, like a wrecker. He threw an old quilt from a trunk onto the bed frame. He crouched by the hearth, stacking kindling, silently. Eleanor stood with arms crossed at the door. What now? Cleaning, cooking, earning her keep? Should he demand more? Light flickered on the walls as the fire caught. Cassian sat with arms on knees and eyes apart. She didn't realize she'd departed, summoning bravery. Eleanor asked why. Her voice broke mid-word. Cassian ignored her. He answered quietly and definitively after a long wait. No one else would, only that. No sympathy, claims, or lying. Eleanor's chest twisted uncomfortably. She lay covered on the fire's floor. In the rough blanket, she felt smaller and more seen than in years. Though the wind rocked the unfastened shutter, the silence was no longer thick. That was shelter. Rather than trust, a quieter, older beginning, just surviving together. Eleanor closed her eyes. The fires warmed her shattered spirit. Maybe beginnings didn't need great phrases. Maybe they just wanted someone to stay when everyone left. The next morning, Eleanor smelled fires and heard wood stacking. Cassian split logs brutally outside. Each axe swing was purposeful, a wordless conversation between man and tool. The horse grazed carelessly nearby. The quilt tightened over Eleanor, who sat up, aching muscles but a new weight in her chest. Not dread, not hope, but unfamiliar. She stood up and crossed the cabin gently. Under her bare feet, the floor creaked, yet the walls held. She had more than yesterday. A damaged tin cup with clean water by the hearth. A little loaf of bread was wrapped roughly in fabric next to it. Cassian did not announce it. She felt the quiet offering more than any speech. Savoring each bite, she ate sparingly. Though rough, the bread tasted like care without demand, which she hadn't felt in a while. After finishing, she left. Her shoulders were still covered in the quilt. The sun hardly warmed the parched ground in the cool morning. Her reception was delayed by Cassian. He split log after log, making efficient, almost meditative movements. Eleanor silently regarded him, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Finally, she stacked the chopped wood near the cabin wall. Cassian glanced at her briefly, giving her a look of acceptance rather than anger or condemnation. They collaborated silently. She carried, he cut. The pile rose steadily. Eleanor kept going even though her arms shook by midday. Her muscle pain was confirmation that she was alive and capable of more than survival. Cassian offered her another piece of bread without comment after setting the axe down. The silence between them as they ate in the meager shade of the shattered porch provided comfort. Eleanor dared inquire. "Did you own this place?" she asked softly. Cassian looked toward the horizon while wiping his pants. She worried he wouldn't respond. He added, "Used to," 2 words that would fill the valley. Lady Eleanor swallowed. She stopped pushing. Not all wounds needed reopening to establish their existence. In the afternoon, they fixed what they could. Cassian strengthened the door using scrap wood. Eleanor brushed years of cabin dust and debris from nooks. Neither sought assistance. No thanks was needed. Cassian rekindled the fire at night. Eleanor sat nearby watching the flames dance. She realized she hadn't thought of Grafton, the auctioneer, or the sneering looks all day. Only now. Cassian polished a gun slowly across from her. His scarred hands moved tenderly, surprising her. Wind roared across the valley. Night was kept at bay by the fire inside the shoe. Eleanor tightened the quilt and breathed. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if Cassian Holt would keep her or determined she was too heavy. She was not shackled, caged, or forgotten tonight. Tonight, 2 broken souls shared a roof, fire, and stillness that screamed louder than promise. Eleanor had enough. The days got into a groove, neither spoke. Cassian rode alone at daylight and vanished into the hills without explanation. Eleanor would gather water from the stream, fix damaged window frames with canvas remnants, and dust from spots the sweeper couldn't reach by lunchtime. They were used to each other's silence. Cassian always came home at night. They sat near the fire at night, 2 figures silhouetted by flickering light, saying nothing and sharing everything. Eleanor learned to read him by the subtle signs, like his jaw tightening before a storm or his hand lifting when he liked something she fixed. Cassian's survival language was beginning to make sense. Did what, even in this forgotten hole, the outer world approached. A faraway, harsh horse whinny started everything. 3 nights later, Eleanor saw boot prints near the stream that were too deep and fresh for Cassian. She dismissed it as animals or travelers, but anxiety persisted. Cassian noticed too. Before stapling the horse one evening after coming late, he studied the horizon for a while. Always wary, his eyes had darkened and become more vigilant. He said nothing. He never did. Before sitting down that night, he positioned his rifle near the hearth. The wind rattled the unfastened shutters, and Cassian's breathing from across the room kept Eleanor awake long after the fire had died down. She thought of the town they left, the sneering men, and the ignoring ladies. She wondered what may follow. She dozed out of fear of outsiders, losing what they had constructed, the tiny piece stitched together from silent struggle and remaining stubbornly. Cassian went early the next morning with his weapon over his back. Eleanor watched him leave, her chest constricting. She frantically patched a blanket and sharpened the old kitchen knife till it shone. The sun dragged itself across the sky, slower than usual. She walked the little hut at twilight, the wooden flooring groaning under her bare feet. Cassian hadn't returned. She didn't dare start the fire. The antique shotgun Cassian had cleaned rested over her knees as she sat beside the window. After hours of cold, distant stars, a shadow emerged from the darkness. Heart jumped into Eleanor's throat. She gripped the shotgun tightly, the barrel quivering, but as the figure approached, she saw Cassian's familiar coat and cap slump. He carefully slipped inside after looking over his shoulder. Eleanor breathed then. He secured the door without saying a word, although his jaw and shoulders were tense. Danger was approaching. Cassian inspected the rifle slowly beside the hearth. Eleanor could feel stress beneath his stone face. Silence may not have protected them from a hunter. Cabin shutters rattled like skeletal fingers as the wind howled through broken slats. The low fire cast unsettling shadows across the room. Cassian sat by the fire with his weapon in his lap and boots firmly planted. Eleanor watched him from the cot, her shoulders wrapped in the thick quilt. He hadn't talked since returning, but he didn't need to. His jaw set, his eyes flicked to the entrance, then the windows, and his hand never left his firearm. Enough was enough. Night closed in, bringing unforeseen dangers. Eleanor could no longer bear their stillness. She stood on the cold floor after swinging her legs off the cot. Was it local? Her question was silent. Cassian ignored her. She worried he wouldn't answer for a while. He said maybe from the flames without looking away. One word revealed Eleanor's unnamed concerns. Someone wanted her back. Some assumed she belonged to them. Throat tightened. Cassian looked at her briefly, glittering gray eyes catching hers over the flickering shadows. His voice was low and certain. You're not going back. Not a question. It wasn't negotiated. A vow. The impact nearly buckled Eleanor's knees. She crossed the room to sit near the fire, close enough to feel its warmth, but not close enough to touch him. As frail and important as breath, that invisible line separated them. They sat in silence, the fire blazing and the wind roaring beyond the thin walls. Cassian moved, reaching for his coat. He placed an old, discolored scrap of fabric on the floor between them. Eleanor leaned in, curious. Army uniform patch, faded and tattered. She lightly traced the torn edges with her fingertip. She said, "You fought," without his confirming. Once, Cassian nodded and lost. He said, voice hoarse, that he lost everything, not just a war. She requested no specifics. Some wounds bled more when mentioned. She said, "Me too." His face scars were illuminated by the flames as he glanced at her. Every syllable reflected old anguish. Two rejected people sitting on a creaky wooden floor discussing their pain without shame. When a branch snapped outside, they tensed quickly. Cassian rose smoothly, rifle ready, body coiled like a spring. Eleanor held the shotgun by the hearth with more stability than a week earlier. They waited. The second lasted minutes, the fire low. Once again, night settled. No sounds or movement outside the window. Cassian lowered the weapon gently, his shoulders tense. Eleanor cautiously placed the shotgun, heart racing. Something had changed when Cassian turned toward her. She felt his weight as he traversed the small room in 2 steps and crouched in front of her. He whispered, "You're not alone." Words broke Eleanor more than any strike. She nodded while speechless. Cassian demanded no thanks or pledges. He stayed beside her as the fire burned low and the storm battered the walls. Eleanor no longer felt like a commodity or a burden to be traded or abandoned. She felt seen and heard in ruthless survival language. That was worth more than gold. After the fire burned out, Cassian stood and threw another log onto the fireplace to revive it. Eleanor watched him with a forbidden tightness in her chest. Maybe name it. She believed there were other options besides survival. Just maybe. Something beyond the terror resembled belonging. Following days went like a stale breath. Each sunrise offered a strange peace, and each evening carried unspoken things. Cassian strengthened the hut windows with salvaged wood and put trail traps. Eleanor repaired blankets and prepared food, cleaning their meager possessions. The timetable and orders were absent. Only two lives moving gently around each other like dancers discovering a new rhythm. Cassian sometimes spent hours exploring the valley and traps. Eleanor breathed again without realizing it when he returned. He was skinning a rabbit he'd caught by the creek one evening, as the sky turned purple and gold. Though fast, his hands weren't brutal. He was exact, polite, and knew sorrow and what it cost to kill life to preserve it. Eleanor watched for a long time before stepping closer, her voice quiet against the cool air. Cassian looked up for a millisecond. She thought he might refuse to teach her. He adjusted the knife and nodded. She kneeled next to him, not crowding him. Cassian taught her how to hold the blade and cut the belly cleanly. His hands gently guided hers without catching, then let go, trusting her to continue. Eleanor kept her cool despite her stomach turning at blood. She survived worse. Cassian meticulously cleaned the blade afterward. Heart racing, Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. It went beyond the rabbit. Being trusted with something real, they returned to the cabin with the meat as the stars appeared. Cassian raised the heat, and Eleanor cooked clumsily but determinedly. When the meat was rough, he didn't complain. She felt strangely proud as he ate it, silently applauding each bite. After, they sat by the fire in silent companionship. The ancient firearm was polished by Cassian, her only decent garment ruptured while Eleanor sewed. Finally, she spoke into the silence. "I'm not who they said I was," she murmured, her voice calm despite the lump in her throat. "Not cursed or born wrong, I just didn't belong to the appropriate people." Cassian listened without looking up. The air surrounding them shifted, and she felt it. Her hands trembled as she stitched. She steadied the fabric by pressing it flat. Cassian put the rifle away. "You don't have to explain," he murmured. Eleanor wanted to, possibly for the first time. "They called me a burden," she mumbled. "Said I'd never be wanted." Cassian's deep, forceful voice informed her of their error. Two words broke the darkness inside her. Eleanor bit her lip, fearing tears. "Please." He didn't promise her a future. I didn't promise her forever. He gave her something rarer, freedom from shame. Eleanor stood firm as the wind pelted the cabin walls again. She closed her eyes and reclined against the rough wood. She wasn't someone's fault in this torn place. She wasn't a burden, just Eleanor. In Cassian's stillness, she found something she never knew she needed. A house with presence, not promises. The next morning was misty, with the sun cast in a faint haze. Eleanor heard the creak and smelled damp ground. Cassian was up, silently examining the weapon and adjusting his holster leather strap. An air shift occurred. The feeling was in her bones, a warning. Without commenting, Cassian handed her a little sack. Dried meat, canteen, cloth-wrapped knife. He didn't need explanation. His hand showed it. Lost half a second. "Be ready." Eleanor nodded, holding the satchel to her chest. She gathered water all morning, her eyes on the slope beyond the valley. Today's wind made odd sounds, metal spurs and hooves echoing. Cassian was standing near the cabin door, tense and eyes alert, when she returned with a racing heart. "Riders," he said. He spoke his first words since sunrise. Eleanor carefully placed the pail, holding her hands firm. She inquired from town. Cassian nodded tightly. "Maybe more," he said. They moved fast. Cassian put out the fire to hide the smoke. Eleanor checked the door latch and quickly tacked canvas to the back window. Painfully long hours passed. Afternoon turned sickly gold as hooves broke over the hills. 4 guys rode into the valley, their forms stark against the dying light. Their jackets were dusty and weapons captured the last light rays. Eleanor crouched at the window, heart racing. Cassian remained calm in the middle. His rifle was casually held. They waited for riders to dismount. One tall, broad man with a crooked sheriff's badge smashed his fist on the cabin door. The man shouted, "Cassian, stop. Hand over the girl outside. You have no claim." Her. Eleanor leaned against the wall, fidgeting with the knife. Cassian remained motionless and silent. Sheriff tried again. Judge Wesson demarcated her property. "Holt, you're sheltering a thief. Don't complicate this." The hush inside was tight. Eleanor sensed it. Cassian turned to look at her, torn between fear and defiance. "Will you fight for yourself?" He questioned her silently. She strengthened her knife grip. Sheriff cursed outside, ordering his troops to spread out. Moving his weight, Cassian raised the weapon. Something would finish tonight. Eleanor stood by, hearing blood roar. She was done hiding and letting others judge her. She would face whatever came next standing. Cassian nodded briefly. Trust, approval, and a vow. Outside, boots crunched gravel, approaching closer. Inside, two damaged and obstinate souls fought a world that wanted to erase them. For once, Knife Eleanor wasn't just surviving. She was ready to battle. First shot shattered calm like lightning. Eleanor recoiled as wood splinters flew from the door. Cassian acted quickly. He carefully stepped to the window, fired twice, and reloaded. Screams and boots pummeled the earth outside. The sheriff's men hid behind rocks and trees. Eleanor clutched the knife so firmly her knuckles turned white, pressing against the wall. Another bullet pierced the hearth's flimsy brickwork. Dust and smoke permeated the air. Low, calm Cassian's voice sliced through the commotion. "Stay low." She nodded, creeping toward the kitchen counter as a protection. Cassian's calm, lethal, immovable form was framed by the broken window from her crouch. Fighting for glory wasn't his goal. Fighting because he had someone to protect and something to lose. The window frame was hit by another shot. Cassian ducked and fired. The ridge grunted in anguish. One man down, three more. Her ears rang with Eleanor's heartbeat she couldn't conceal. This time, no. She quietly entered the wilderness through a second door at the cabin's back. She thought forward like a man who had lived too long without safety, remembering Cassian's traps, buried snares, and concealed pits from days earlier. She only had to draw them in. She pushed the door open and left, heart thudding. She kept low and weaved through the long grasses despite the cool air slapping her face. Gunfire boomed behind her. She heard yells. Someone saw her. Good. She fled, making herself a target, bringing two guys from the cabin to the traps. Snap! The ground fell away. The weapon clattered as one of the soldiers fell into a trap pit, screaming. Eleanor did not glance back. The second man hesitated and paid the price. Only one shot came from the cabin. As Cassian stood, he fell. Eleanor staggered toward the cabin, gasping. The door slammed behind her as she burst inside. Cassian glanced at her, his mouth firm. He had raw, piercing eyes. The sheriff cursed outside. "You'll regret this, Holt," he shouted. "You can't hide her forever." Cassian steadfastly held his gun on the window ledge. He called back, hammering, "You ain't taken her." Quiet beat. Lower and nasty, the sheriff spoke. "Not over yet." The boots hit gravel. Last man mounted his horse and carried the wounded. After one last glance at the cabin, the sheriff vanished into the dusk. Silence returned to the valley. Only the trickle of saddles receding away and the crackling of a dying fire. Eleanor fell to the floor, heart racing, arms shaking. Cassian silently closed the door and slid the thick bolt. Nobody talked for a time. Cassian crouched in front of her across the room. "Are you okay?" he inquired. Eleanor gasped and nodded. She blinks away tears that burnt behind her eyelids. "I didn't want to conceal," she whispered. Cassian hesitated, then gently moved a hair from her face. "You didn't." Two simple words that hit harder than any praise she had ever heard. She struggled and chose herself, and Cassian Holt, silent, broken, and determined, picked her too. They sat on the old floor of the ruined hut, surrounded by war smoke and the frail promise of something greater than dread. Together, they fought the world. Eleanor now didn't feel like a prize. She felt partnered and equal, home worth defending. Smoke, sweat, and ancient wood filled the cabin. Eleanor had never felt more at home. Cassian nailed down the last nail to board up the broken glass. Sheriff was gone for now, but they knew the world outside would never leave them alone. It was their first time carving out a place for themselves. Eleanor slowly swept the floor, feeling the weight of survival in her bones. Cassian looked at her across the room. No words were exchanged, but his eyes softened. An honor. Quiet invitation. They sat side by side on the crumbling porch steps, peering out over the empty valley. At dusk, Cassian instinctively tucked a wayward strand behind Eleanor's ear as the wind tugged at her hair. A clumsy, uncertain touch. It was perfect. Eleanor smiled, small and genuine. The first smile she felt safe showing in years. One by one, the stars appeared overhead. After much stillness, Cassian spoke. You can stay, just choice, no demand, no expectation. Eleanor felt its profundity like a stone tossed into a still pond, causing ripples in her heart. Turning, she examined his face. He couldn't disguise his scars, harshness, and silent hope. I wasn't planning to leave, she said, twitching mouth. Cassian, almost smiling. Almost. The cabin fire roared again, flooding the smashed windows with warmth. Damage would be fixed tomorrow. To make more risks, possibly more wounds. This happened tonight. Heat from the fire, her companion's constancy. The unsaid vow to face whatever came next together, not as savior and saved, not as debt, but as two survivors who had found something more important than safety in each other. Non-timber and stone dwelling, silence, faith, and the stubborn, agonizing marvel of being. Cassian stood and extended his hand. Eleanor took it and they entered. Enter the damaged shack. Their lives would be forged into love that wasn't uttered to be comprehended. The daily selected love, in every modest, stubborn staying. Wind howled. The valley carries old whispers. Door closed inside. Eleanor felt it for the first time, not empty quiet anymore, quite full. With everything they fought for, their entire selves, building together. In a world that judges and abandons the broken and lost, Eleanor and Cassian found something rare. Not rescue, no great gestures of redemption, but a quiet, stubborn love built on daily choice. Have you encountered someone who made you feel seen, despite your quiet? Someone who accepted you as you are? I want your tale. Leave a comment. If this story affected you, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more love stories from the ashes.